Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
There's a lot that could be said about how to set and reach productivity goals in a dental practice, or any business for that matter. And with that in mind, most of the stuff you'll read about this has to do with how to set these goals. You know, we want to produce X amount this month or quarter, and then we're going to break it down by day, maybe even by provider, and so on. And while there's a method to that, it's not all that complex. So when you read through all this stuff, the bigger issue is, yeah, we've set our goal, but how are we actually supposed to achieve it? For example, I could say we want to collect $180,000 this month in the practice. I could look at the fact that we have 18 working days, you like that easy math I'm doing here, and figure out that the practice needs to collect $10,000 a day. I could then even break it down further by provider. Great. And this in and of itself could be beneficial for somebody who either A, doesn't set goals, or B, that doesn't drill down on these things to make sure that they know what needs to be done in a week or a day. But again, you set a goal for $180,000. How exactly are you supposed to get there? What are the specific tangible actions you should focus on? And what do you do if 6 days into this 18-day month, where you're supposed to be doing $10,000 a day, mind you, you're only at $30,000? How do you get back on track and still pull off this $180,000 target? It seems that something is missing here. It's sort of the bridge between the setting of and actually achieving a goal. And that's something that we teach MGE clients, and what I want to cover in this week's episode. The specific management actions you should be taking to make sure that your goals actually materialize in the real physical universe. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And I think the best way to walk through and explain this process would be by continuing the example that I started here just in the introduction. All right, so we have our number for the month, which is $180,000. And that's collections. And I should just make a comment, because sometimes I'll talk about producing 180 or collecting 180. I'm aware that they are two different things, and you're not always going to collect all that you produce, but I would definitely expect it to be pretty darn near close, like 97%, pretty close. So for me, and I'm not getting even into adjusting production or whatever, I'm assuming if you happen to be a network, which again, our viewpoint, you should eventually get out, that you're producing at your adjusted fees, you're actually going to collect what you're actually producing. Okay. So when I'm throwing these numbers, I might use them interchangeably, collection, production. I am aware they are different, but I expect them to be pretty darn close to the same. So we've got this number, $180,000. We have 18 working days. Again, my simple math now gets a little more complex. We have 1 doctor, a part-time associate doctor, and 2 hygienists. So let's go through the steps to break our goal down that many of you may already know. Okay. Or if you do know them and you're not doing them, you should be doing them. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down by provider a little bit here. So we're expecting $45,000 of this 180 to be hygiene. It's not quite 30%, and it should be, but just work with me for this example. So 45 is supposed to be hygiene, which leaves 135 that's supposed to come from our doctors. So let's say we project that our owner doctor should do 95,000 of that, and the associate doctor should do 40. Added to our 45,000 in hygiene, that gives us 180,000. So 18 days, 10,000 a day. Doc is supposed to do 95,000 of that, which if we break that down by 18 days is a kind of odd number. It's 5,277. Let's just say 5,300 for argument's sake per day for the owner doctor. The associate's working 10 days this month because they're part-time. So they're supposed to do 40. So we want our associate to do 4,000 a day. The hygienists are working 18 days. So that's 2,500 a day from hygiene, or 1,250 per hygienist. Sure, it could be better, but I'm just doing this for a simple example. So, work with me here. All right. So usually someone will break it down this far, or if they do, this is where it ends. We go, okay, great. Rah, rah. Let's all go do 180, right? And this is where the problems begin. Hygiene is actually pretty simple, because as long as we keep hygiene full, our hygienists should produce the $45,000. Where it gets tricky is on the doctor's schedule. That's where it gets real tricky, because how are we supposed to make sure they actually produce and resultantly collect this much? Where is it supposed to come from? Now, obviously, it's supposed to come from patients who need dentistry, no duh. But we need to figure that out. It goes back to something we call the cycle of production. And to give you a couple examples of this, and then we'll break down how it would work on a doctor's schedule, what is the cycle of production? If I want more of something, I have to figure out all the smaller somethings that go into this bigger something. If I'm I'm manufacturing tables and I want to make 1,000 tables this month, well, then I need to figure out all the actions that go into making tables and making sure that they're done in the proper volume to get me 1,000 tables. How much raw materials do I need? How many legs need to be made? How many surfaces need to be made? How many people do I need doing sanding and finish sanding? And, if they're wooden tables, how many people do I need staining them? You figure out all the small steps that lead to the bigger step. What tends to happen is we set the goal for the bigger step, which is produce. If you want to take a separate comparison, look at new patients for a second. So if I want more new patients, let's take something super simple with regards to new patients. Let's say I want to get 50 new patients a month, and right now I'm getting less than that. Well, I could take a look at all the steps or the cycle of production that goes into getting a new patient. We'll take a look at it for a second. If the final thing that I have is a new patient sitting in the dental chair, let's walk that backwards. Well, I have to schedule that person. In order to schedule them, they have to actually reach out to my practice, via whether it's a Google ad or a Facebook ad or whatever. And I have to convert that person when they call, right? And then, I have to have enough incoming ad calls in order to get the number of new patients I want. So let's do some basic math. Let's say my conversion rate is 50% and I want 50 new patients. That means I need 100 incoming calls or reaches into the practice. So if right now I'm only getting 75 calls a month, I need to get those calls up to 100 in order to hit my target of 50 new patients, or maybe work something else, referrals or something like that. So if you take a look at where would I push first, I could always work on improving the conversion rate, but where would I push first is how do I increase the number of incoming calls? Because if I get more incoming calls, assuming we can handle those incoming calls, then my conversion rate's 50%, thereby I should get more new patients. So what's the cycle of production for production? I know that sounds kind of silly, in the sense of production meaning in a dental practice, patients actually getting dental work done. But what's the cycle of production for that? Well, let's walk it backwards. I'm in your chair right now and you're about to do an inlay and 5 onlays, right? Okay, so how did I get there? Well, the first thing was, prior to me sitting in your chair, if we walk this backwards, you had to present that treatment plan to me and I had to accept it and I had to pay for it. Well, prior to you presenting it to me and having me accept it and pay for it and thereby schedule it and show up, I first had to actually have it diagnosed. So if you walk this backwards, right? You see that you start with, and then we can walk it forwards. You start with a patient who needs treatment, whether this is a new patient or a patient of record. That treatment is diagnosed. That treatment is presented. That treatment is accepted and paid for. That treatment is scheduled, and that treatment ends up on your book. In the office, the patient's actually sitting in the chair. Okay, that's the whole cycle. So when you're putting a goal for production, you're actually putting a goal for the last step in this cycle of production. So what we have to do is walk it backwards and figure out, well, what do we have to do in the interim steps to make sure we hit this target we set for ourselves of $95,000 for the owner doctor and $40,000 for the associate doctor. So the first thing that tells you is if I want to have 100 or 135,000, I guess that's the number from the 180 that we set for the month, $135,000 worth of dental treatment in the chair that I'm going to be doing this month. That means I probably need to present more than $135,000 worth of treatment because I'm not going to close everybody for everything. That's very rare. Sure, there's always outliers. You'll have a week or a day where everybody says yes, but you're usually not going to have a month of 100%. Maybe you will, but it's not going to be a long-term situation. So if we wanted to be on the safe side and I wanted to produce $135,000 this month, how much would I need to present? At least to be on the safe side, probably twice that much, $270,000 worth of treatment. If you want to really be on the safe side, you'd have to probably present more. Maybe $400,000, maybe 3 times, $405,000 just to be on the safe side. But where is all this treatment going to come from? Because it has to be actual valid treatment here, right? I mean, you'll get the occasional patient who is coming in that wants something elective or whatever, like Invisalign or veneers or whatever. But this is stuff that we either have to diagnose this month or it's stuff that we've already diagnosed. And this is where I see this initially screwed up. Okay. Is we go, okay, well, we want to produce this month so much. So the first thing we got to do is get a lot more new patients. Now, I'm not trying to make you disrespectful of getting new patients or that it's not important. New patients are extremely important. But the problem with counting on new patients to salvage your production month, unless it's a very specific type of new patient, for example, an implant funnel patient. But if you're looking at just your average run-of-the-mill new patient who's going to find you on Google or Facebook or get your postcard or something like this, we have no idea what's going on with these folks. They might have just moved to the area and they want a cleaning, or they want to get their kids' teeth cleaned, or or they may need a lot of work. We don't know. So I can't predict what I'm going to produce off of new patients alone because we haven't seen them yet. We have no idea what they're going to need. So counting on new patients to salvage my month or make my month is very dangerous unless you're a specialist, an endo or an oral surgeon or whatever, in which case, again, you're getting a specific type of new patient who's coming in, and that's what you're living off of if you're a specialist. If you're a general dentist, the majority of your revenues should actually be coming from patients of record. People who are either already there and coming in through your hygiene program, or people that you've diagnosed treatment on that need treatment, may have new treatment that you need to diagnose, or patients with treatment that you have already diagnosed that have yet to accept the treatment plan that maybe you presented to them the first time. I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that at least 60% of your revenues should be coming from patients of record, and that excluded hygiene revenue. Okay. So if we wanted to just use that number, I'm not giving you 60% as a hard bound rule, but if we say we need to produce /collect, all right, 135,000 on the doctor's schedule this month, well, that means that, close to $80,000 of that should be coming from patients of record, or 60%. Okay. So where is this going to come from? It's going to come from hygiene. It's going to come from, emergencies, again, which is completely unpredictable. You're not going to get second opinions from your patient records. So primarily, this is going to come from your hygiene department or patients that the doctor is already seeing that maybe have accepted partial treatment, which is a more rare source of these treatment plans. Maybe there's somebody that you're doing one crown on, you presented 4, and they only accepted the 1. Well, you might talk to them about the other 3. Do you see? But that treatment is walking into the practice every day. That's sort of the big picture. So this is where you can kind of toggle these factors to figure out what you need to do in order to meet your goal. And this is where I spoke about this several times over the course of this podcast for the last few years. This is where what we call your morning production meeting is extremely critical. And I'll put a link to a little handout we have on how to do a morning production meeting on the episode webpage. During the morning production meeting, you're looking at who is coming into the practice today. And if you look at your schedule, on your hygiene schedule, you're going to have the list of patients coming in, and these are patients who have treatment plans which you've already diagnosed. So there's a degree of predictability. You know that you diagnosed 3 crowns on this, fellow when he was in 6 months ago or 3 months ago, and he didn't accept for whatever reason. That's there. That's something that's predictable. If there's a new patient at 1 o'clock with a broken tooth, you don't know what you're looking at. That might be a person who has a small chip that just needs a composite, or it might be somebody who needs a crown or a veneer or something like this, right? It's not predictable. Again, not trying to make you disrespectful of new patients. But your morning production meeting is where you're actually looking at the patients who are coming in for the day, especially on the hygiene schedule. Do they have any outstanding treatment? And who is going to present that treatment to them? And how is that whole thing going to work, right? Maybe Dr. 1 is going to be in a root canal at that point, so Dr. 2 is going to be presenting it. And the treatment coordinator's on deck to make sure that they're there to close that treatment plan. So that's going to be your major source of production is going to come from that. So the only thing that the only way this could go wrong is, let's say you look at this and you go, okay, I have my 2 hygienists going, I have me and my part-time associate doctor, and I'm looking at my hygiene schedules every day, and there's just nobody who needs any treatment. So I'm now completely reliant on new patients. Well, if that happens to you, what I would do, and maybe this won't help you this month, Okay. But it's usually not the case. But let's just say that you find yourself in this situation. The patients that are coming in with the treatment that's either already been diagnosed or that you are going to diagnose that month or you have diagnosed that month doesn't quite make the grade to be able to help you pull off your production for this month. Okay. Or, with this month or into the next month. Well, then the chances are you have a lot of patients, unless you're a new practice, whom you've diagnosed treatment for that just aren't coming in. This is something that we've seen routinely, unless it's a new practice, where there just are new patients, is you'll have a practice where hygiene looks great and there's nobody who needs anything because these are your most compliant patients. What I would recommend you do if you find yourself in that situation is go and look at your incomplete treatment list because there's probably a lot of patients on that list and see if those patients are showing up regularly for hygiene. You'll find quite a few are not. Because when you have a situation where you have, 6, 7, 8,000 patients and only, and 2 hygienists, which really that should be closer to 4 or 5 hygienists with good hygiene compliance. What that means is your best patients are showing up on the hygiene schedule. And by best, I don't mean that as a character quality. I mean that they're the most compliant patients. The average patient is not the most compliant patient. That's your top tier patient, right? The majority of your patients, they're great people. They're just not super compliant. Life gets them real busy. They forget. They don't realize they haven't been in for 3 to 5 years. And then they end up in your incomplete treatment list. So I would attack this from 3 areas. All right. Number 1, you got your new patients. Obviously you're going to have your new patients coming in. You want to make sure you're getting lots of new patients in order to meet your production goal and obviously take care of these people. Number 2, you have your patients that are there already in hygiene that should be getting their treatment done. And a couple of episodes ago, I mentioned this because one of the things we found with a lot of doctors, especially newer clients, is they'll have a patient who comes in and they present a treatment to them or a treatment plan to them 6 months ago or 3 months ago. And then they come back for their, either their perio maintenance or their next hygiene appointment. And they don't present it again if the patient didn't accept. So, I came in 6 months ago, you presented a treatment plan to me, and I didn't accept it. So I come back 6 months later and nobody talks to me because I already said no 6 months ago, which again is kind of foolish. It's outstanding treatment. Someone should talk to me about this. Ideally, the doctor, when the doctor comes in and does their exam. Maybe you don't have me scheduled for an exam that day. I'm on a 3-month recall rotation. Well, then it might be the doctor pops over for a second and talks to me about this outstanding treatment. You're never going to get, no one's going to ever accept treatment that you don't present. That's a pretty simple datum, pretty simple to think with. So you're figuring all of that out in the morning production meeting. But let's say even that is not enough to where you want to be. Well, now I would evaluate your inactive patients, meaning the patients who aren't showing up regularly. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. We have something called the hygiene formula. I'll give it to you as a download on the episode webpage. It's a spreadsheet you can fill in, and it tells you based on the number of patients you have in your charts over the last several years and how many are showing up for hygiene, what your compliance rate is. Because where are these patients going to come in? They're going to come in through hygiene. Okay. And that'll tell you if you have a lot of inactive patients. Another thing you can do is look at the total number of charts in your system and then get a number for how many people have an appointment after today. Okay, so imagine you look, even if you want to give it a filter, look at patients over the last 5 years, although you probably have patients who come back, after longer than 5 years, but let's just take 5 years as a number. Filter your patient base by 5 years, and then look at the number of patients in that 5-year horizon of patients that have an appointment after today. When we normally do this with somebody, that number is in the 20%, maybe 30 if they're lucky. A lot of times it's lower than that. So you'll see, 4,000 charts and maybe 1,000 people have an appointment in the software after today. What about those other 3,000 people? They're not scheduled. And because hygiene's full, nobody's chasing these people. And you should be, because you spent money to get these people into your practice the first time. And to top it off, if you're going to do any marketing, those people at least know you. And as a matter of fact, I guarantee you, if I were to call some of those patients and I go, who's your dentist? They would probably say you. You may think that they've gone on to another practice and they're not coming back or whatever. It's just nobody's calling them. Why? Because out of sight, out of mind, hygiene's already full. We can't put another patient in there for another month. So why should we call all these patients who aren't scheduled right now? That's a terrible way of thinking. So the third prong of this, in addition to your morning production meeting with the people that are there, the people on hygiene and making sure you're getting new patients, is making sure that you're keeping your patient base active. And there's a couple of ways that you could attack this. The first thing is, most of these inactive patients are going to end up on your hygiene schedule one way or the other, or the incomplete treatment patients. They're going to end up on the hygiene schedule one way or the other. So you could kind of divvy this list up if you wanted to. So let's say I take my inactive patient list and I go, okay, if it's a lot, you might want to hire somebody part-time or full-time just to call these patients to get them on the hygiene schedule. But the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I have hygiene availability. If I can't fit a patient in for the next 1 to 2 months and I have several thousand inactive patients, I probably need to open up a hygiene chair. It's almost like if you were to imagine, it's like a funnel, right? So the top of the funnel is real wide. Those are all your inactive patients. And then you have this little teeny part at the bottom that the liquid's supposed to flow through. That's your hygiene schedule. So basically you're packing all this up. Okay. So I need to open up the bottom of the funnel a bit so people can start to populate the hygiene schedule. In this case, you might need to add a third hygienist, in which case you might need to expand your associate's hours eventually in this example we're using. But beside the point. So I look at my inactive patient list. If it's a lot, I might want to hire somebody to work it full time. The other thing I could do is have my staff, all spend an hour or a couple hours a week at various points calling these patients. Like, I don't want to just call them when the schedule's not busy. I want to fill the practice up. And for my treatment coordinator, your treatment coordinator, if you have one, isn't talking to patients all the time next to you about the treatment plan that you're presenting unless you're presenting 8 or 9 treatment plans a day. What are they doing when they're not working out financial arrangements with a patient? Well, they should be following up on patients that haven't accepted treatment yet. Maybe somebody that had to go check something, or they're waiting for their house to be refinanced before they applied for credit or something like this. And they should be following up on the incomplete treatment list. How would they do that? Well, I would divide my incomplete treatment list into 2 things, or two sections. Because most of the time you think, well, they'll just call the incomplete treatment list and say, hey, are you ready to do that treatment plan yet? And most of the time those patients are going to say no. Why? Because they weren't closed the first time when they were in the practice, right? So what they're going to do is divide this incomplete treatment list into 2 sections. They may call them and, say, hey, remember we diagnosed so-and-so last time you were here, and the patient say, oh yeah, I'm not ready to do that yet. Fine. If the patient is due for a hygiene visit, the treatment coordinator can schedule them for their next hygiene visit. This is even if, maybe it's a patient who hasn't been in for 2 or 3 years. Fine. Maybe they need a new initial exam. Fine. Schedule them for an hour on the hygiene schedule, and the doc will see them again towards the end of the visit. However you do it. But basically, they're scheduling these patients if they're due or overdue, these incomplete treatment patients, for hygiene, and they're putting them on the hygiene schedule. What about a patient who isn't due for hygiene yet? They were there 2 months ago. You presented a treatment plan. They didn't accept. Well, they could call that patient and say, the doc, the doctor talked to you about X, Y, and Z last time you were here. Yeah, I'm not ready to do that yet. Perfect. Understood. The doctor just wanted me to schedule you to come back in for a couple minutes to make sure everything's staying stable. Okay. That's going to put more opportunities on your schedule to present and thereby get more treatment accepted. Because again, remember, we're trying to present 2 to 3 times what we need to produce this month. Okay. If you're thinking with that. And again, we're not going to close all of it. So where are these presentations going to come from? It's real simple. New patients, hygiene. And from hygiene, we could get inactive patients that are brought back into hygiene, etc. You'll of course get your second opinions, which again are just a new patient, right? But for the most part, that's how you can sort of construct it. But if you're not trying to push the fact that, okay, I have to present $200,000 to $300,000 worth of treatment, it has to be valid treatment. Where is this going to come from? You're going to have trouble at the back end of, how do I produce $135,000 a month? Because it has to come from somewhere. Okay. I guess the lesson here in all of this is, setting goals, or making goals rather, isn't just a matter of breaking down the numbers. It's breaking down the actions that lead to the little steps that lead to your eventual goal. Okay. It's a key part of management. We teach our clients this on the MGE Power Program. If you want to know more about this, I'll put a link on the episode webpage, but it's something that you can apply immediately to take tangible action to actually move towards your goal, rather than just putting a number there and having a void, in the figure out of how we're going to pull off this number. Anyway, I hope this helps. I have those downloads on the episode webpage. If you want to know more about MGE, you can find us at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.